Hi, everybody. How you doing? Marc Ross back, Ructions. Joining me as always, even in this audio challenged environment, is our good friend Gerald Ashley. Gerald, how are you? What's happening?
I'm fine. I'm in London. I'm pretty much convinced you're in Hawaii or somewhere like that. You're just that little bit off the pace with the sound, but I think we can live with that. Yeah, no, I'm fine. Weather's good. Wimbledon's on. Lots of sporting activity all around the world, which is very much your sort of neck of the woods rather than mine. But seems that sports in kind of full flow everywhere. There's the Ashes Test match against Australia as well, so there's plenty going on that front.
Yeah, we got an F1 race, Silverstone this weekend. The Tour de France is on. Yeah, a lot of good sports. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm completely overwhelmed by the tour, and I'll try not to bore people too much later about it. But I think I may be not a late convert to it, but I've watched it on and off probably over the last 20 or 30 years. But maybe it's the coverage is now particularly good. There's much more computer graphics and all the rest of it, and the quality of cycling is, beyond mad. I mean, it's just, how these guys don't drop dead, I don't know. But a little bit more about that later on.
Yeah, essentially, it's like riding from Phoenix in the U.S. It'd be like riding from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. over 21 days. I mean, they're doing like 120 miles a day.
Yeah,
Nonstop, 2 rest days. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it's mad. I think we can all agree on that.
And it's got to be arguably the most. Well, it's certainly a top 10 soft power display. I mean, the imagery, the thought and effort put into it, the marketing behind it. It's super impressive for the nation of
Yeah,
France.
you've kind of taught me to think more in terms of this sort of global marketing angle, and I wonder quite what the French do with it, because obviously it's fantastic as a Tour de France, and they've stretched the brand a little bit because this time they started in Bilbao in Spain, in the Basque Country. Last year they were in Copenhagen. Believe it or not, it's even been in the north of England, in Yorkshire. I'm struggling to remember exactly when, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So they can do that, but in a sense, otherwise they're a little bit constrained by the nature of the beast. I suppose they just go for the global television audience.
But yeah, that's a good observation. My understanding that the cities that sponsor, say, the first 2 stages outside of France actually pay for the right for that. And I'm sure there's some crazy marketing. Like when I was watching,
I think that's right, and I suspect it's big bucks because I know when it came to the north of England, to Yorkshire, the so-called Tour de Yorkshire, lovely bit of franglais there. I think quite a lot of money was involved. I mean, legitimately, they bought the marketing rights or whatever, to the right to hold the race there.
Yeah, and then watching from the Basque races, as you point out, there was definitely like Basque, marketing, tourism kind of promotions that I saw during the broadcast. But I think it is interesting because like the top teams are UAE, which is a sovereign wealth fund, or it's a nation state, I guess. Yeah. And then Jumbo Vista, right, which I guess is a supermarket chain in the Netherlands. It doesn't still have like those kind of brand name.
No, the brand names
like
are
the
very
Microsoft.
Odd. In fact, some of them are quite comic. Doorstep floor wipe or whatever they're called. There's some very peculiar ones, and they seem very localized. In fact, I didn't know that Jumbo Visma is a Dutch supermarket chain. So
I had to look it up because I was like, "What is? I've never heard of this."
Yeah,
that was this
and
such a weird name, but yeah,
where is Coca-Cola and all these guys, or maybe some big French brands? I mean, Citroën have got a team, but there's no Perrier. I would have thought it's a perfect one for Perrier. Clean living and all the rest of it, and sparkling water from the Alps. So in a way, you're right. The teams are slightly odd. In a way, it reminds me a bit of Formula One in the 1960s, where you had individuals that actually sponsored teams. I mean, the original McLaren was Bruce McLaren, who started his own team. Then there was Lord Hesketh, who ran his own team with James Hunt until he ran out of cash. And okay, there were big boys around like Ferrari, but it was a much more amateurish sort of approach. And I wonder if that's what we'll see change in the Tour, actually.
Yeah, same with Williams, and I think you're spot on about F1. You look at the McLaren team. I don't know how much F1 you watch, but they've got every top 100 brand in the world somewhere, like some kind of sticker on that car.
Yeah.
It's interesting because here in the States, cycling is, people do it, but the people that do it are kind of like the type A, VC, Silicon Valley. There's a huge cycling community in DC. They tend to be well-educated, lawyers, all that kind of, people that you vacation with in the south of France. So I wonder if that is the next evolution. The Netflix deal, they're showing that. I think that show is great. It's surprising to me that there isn't more kind of brand class A advertisers, but maybe that's coming.
Brand managers should look at this, and I don't know what they would dive into the data. How much coverage is there around the rest of the world, and should grab at it. The other thing is that we don't have enough non-European riders. There's a big contingent from the United States, has been really the last 20, 30, 40 years, but there's no Chinese, no Japanese. I think there's one African guy who's kind of, he's a notable exception, but it's very much Western European plus the States. So there's, I think there have been one or two South Americans in the past, but it's still quite regional rather than global.
And maybe the broadcasting is driving it, because it's tough. Some of these races go on for 5 hours in one day, and honestly, there's not that much action through some of the races. Like there could be an hour or two where it's pretty static.
Well,
so maybe it's not TV friendly enough for these kind of big marketers. But it seems ripe for the opportunity. It seems ripe to me for folks to get involved.
I'm amazed you haven't pitched, and got a nice arrangement fee at some point, Mark. Really?
I'll pitch anybody. My pitches aren't that great, as you can imagine. Speaking of pitches, let's go to Russia. As we were meeting last time, 2 weeks ago, I think Prigozhin was about to launch his coup d'etat or whatever he was launching.
Well,
what should we make of this? Go back to your czarist knowledge, Rasputin, your 1700 years knowledge of Russia. Is this just Russia being Russia?
The honest answer is I don't know. I don't have it to hand, but there is that rather elegant Winston Churchill quote about, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, a mystery wrapped inside an enigma wrapped in something else. And this was his comments about Stalin linking up with Hitler and how the entire world was absolutely nonplussed by the Ribbentrop Pact of the summer of 1939. And it does seem, most countries enjoy a bit of exceptionalism. United States does. Britain, we obviously do for obvious reasons, ho ho. And of course, our dear friends across the channel, the French, have made an absolute art out of being exceptional. But in many ways, when you look at countries around the world, it is Russia that is just incredibly difficult to read and understand what's going on. We've got no special inside track, or I certainly haven't, but I stick to the same mantra that we were probably talking about whilst it all blew up last week, that this is a static war and it's stuck. And if the Ukrainians really had the military ability, last weekend, 2 weekends ago now, they had a hell of a chance to really punch through and make something happen, and they didn't. Now, you can argue as to why that was, but I think the original premise holds true, that neither side is strong enough to win. And this is just going to rumble on and on.
Yeah, both sides aren't strong enough to win, or they don't want to use, well, the Ukrainians have no air force, so it's like virtually impossible, my understanding of military warfare, to advance without having air superiority or any kind of air support. So they lack that. The Russians obviously haven't brought all their arsenal to bear. So it's a bit of a quagmire. But internally, what's interesting is that, Putin has been vilified here in the West. And then suddenly there was like this pivot to be like, oh, well, he's like the worst. He's like the least worst bad guy. Don't root for Putin's downfall. We don't need 20 separate Russian states, et cetera, et cetera. What a freaking mess.
The old devil theory, isn't it? And I suppose everybody starts worrying about nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, of course, we shouldn't forget that. Quite how all this pans out, I don't know, but I'm going to pronounce his name wrongly, Mr. Prigozhin or whatever he's called. I think his days on the planet might be slightly numbered. Mr. Putin has got a habit of serving up chemicals into people's cups of tea and things like this. And
but for all we know, Putin
have a stunt. I don't know, but I think that guy's days are numbered, to be honest.
Yeah, but Prigozhin was saying he was doing it for Putin because Putin was being held back by his bumbling generals and Ministry of Defense. So he was trying to do the honorable thing and help Putin out.
Isn't this yet another normal theme of the Russian military going back 200 or 300 years? They had a shambolic mobilization in the First World War. Stalin, for whatever reason, despite unbelievably good intelligence for the Soviet spy in Japan, of all places, had plenty of warning of the German invasion of Russia, and just completely ignored it. So, chaos seems to be the central theme in Russian military matters. But they have 2 or 3 overwhelming advantages. Even in this modern world, I think if they really wanted to, they could put an almost suicidally large army into the field. Maybe not quite so easy as 50 or 100 years ago. And of course, the old Russians saying that their favorite generals are General January and General February. And there's no doubt that, this is a summer war, and it's a limited war. In many ways, it's got a kind of medieval quality to it. Everybody agrees there's a fighting season, and we kind of knock 6 bells out of one another and then stop. And it's not total war. It's not a blitzkrieg. It's nothing remotely like that. And so all the pundits, us included, get completely blindsided all the time because both sides pump out propaganda and false information. But the truth of the matter is they're crawling around in the same 20-mile zone, and nothing's happening.
There's 2 things. There's 2 things I want to bring up. William Burns, who's the director of the CIA here in the United States. To me, he's like Team Biden's MVP. Like, he gets the toughest assignments. He's basically, wherever he is, he's running the foreign policy. And apparently during this coup d'etat or ruction, see what I did there? He called his equivalent in Moscow and said, hey, the U.S. had nothing to do with this. This is an internal Russian thing. This isn't some covert CIA operation, which was interesting. And then this week, we were tweeting about this. Apparently it leaked out to the Wall Street Journal that U.S. apparatchiks, U.S. government folks are meeting with Russian counterparts to secretly talk about how to bring this thing to a conclusion. And you're right, this isn't total warfare. The Russian embassy is in full operation here. The Russian ambassador's house is in full operation in D.C.
Yeah.
It's business as usual. And there's talking going on. It's just a matter of how do we get out of this thing? And I think that's a good segue because next week, NATO meets, and this is front and center. What is NATO going to do?
And all sorts of pointless political musical chairs have unfolded with who is going to be the next leader of NATO. Ben Wallace normally gets a pretty good press over here, the UK Defence Secretary. Though again, in truth, if we're honest, Britain can't easily field any serious army in support of NATO. But then we couldn't in 1939, we couldn't in 1914, we couldn't in 1798. I mean, Britain as a country has never really had a proper standing army. So I think Mr. Biden doesn't like Britain or doesn't like Ben Wallace or whoever. And somebody in a stroke of absolute genius has come up with the idea that it should be Frau von der Leyen again, who famously so mismanaged the German army when she was defense minister. They were practicing with broom handles. What we should make of any of this, Lord only knows, other than that, I don't know, as I get older, I get increasingly cynical about all of this. It just seems to be one of these kind of party games that, is played played out amongst a small group of people, and they just interchange with one another. And as you know, my great phrase in British politics is interchangeable idiots. Well, none of this makes for good long-term policy, I don't think, to be honest.
Well, I think, I'd love to talk to you why the center-right press in the UK, I mean, there's this whole anti-Biden, anti-Brit, I don't know, narrative. I mean, that may be true. I mean, Biden may not like London, but London is the most important ally the United States has. So I don't know. That narrative is just kind of goofy, and I don't know. It's kind of filling up pages. The NATO leadership, the Secretary General, apparently Jens Stoltenberg is going to stay on. They're going to keep him. They're going to extend his term.
Well, again, he's kind of everybody's second choice, and so that's why he kind of stays there. And this is maybe an unusual name to invoke in this conversation, but I'm reminded very much of the observation by Dominic Cummings. Remember him? And he said the problem with the British press when it looked at politics was it was obsessed by personalities and had virtually no interest in policy. And again, we changed the head of NATO. Is there a policy change? There isn't there. But this is not. It may, hopefully, it is being thought about where it matters, but it's certainly not discussed in the sort of wider public square.
But I think NATO, honestly, does it really matter who the Secretary General is? To be honest, I mean, can you name the last 3 Secretary Generals? I mean, I think the fact that this alliance exists, the fact that it works together, the fact that it's going to open an office in Tokyo, I think is really important. I don't know. It just, I think the political reporting around the personalities, who's leading. I mean, give me a break. Secretary General, NATO?
I think you're making exactly the point Cummings is that let's concentrate on policy, and the policy move is to Japan, and quite which particular talking head is doing the press conferences is neither here nor there. But that's what we get spoon-fed by a large slice of the media.
Well, it'll be interesting before the NATO summit. Joe Biden is going to stop in London town. He's going to meet with King Charles, and he's going to meet with Rishi Sunak. So I don't know. Maybe he'll change the tone. Maybe he'll bring a Beatles, Rolling Stone cover band with him to smooth over the Londoners.
Who knows? I've no idea.
Speaking of no idea, let's talk about elections. It's a bit of a quiet time here in the States. We just celebrated our independence, so it's a bit of a quiet week. Obviously, a lot of candidates on the campaign trail doing stuff around parades and whatnot, but we're entering kind of a quiet season, I think, the next few weeks. But in August, there's a big debate, GOP, who's going to be there. I think interesting for me, it's been Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, has been getting a lot of good press. He gives, he's speaking of somebody who gives good personality. He's great to interview. He talks it up. The FT did a profile on him about 2 weeks ago for their Saturday edition, and they met him at a diner in New Jersey, like totally on brand, totally Sopranos, the whole deal. I don't know, but it's a bit of a slog. I don't know what you're seeing in your part of the world, but there just does not seem to be that much excitement around what's happening.
No, it's certainly not making it across the Atlantic, whereas, the average British voter doesn't know who British politicians are, let alone what's going on in the States. One thing that slightly attracted my attention was, and I may get his name wrong here, but the Democrat in California, is it Gavin Newsom?
Gavin Newsom, great hair, great.
Yeah,
he owns a vineyard too. Yeah.
That if Biden's not up to it and nobody wants Kamala Harris, I am available. Now, is that a serious thing, or is it just kind of more games?
It's both. I mean, I think that there, I even heard some crazy theory today that, Biden's actually going to go into the election, beat Trump, and then, he'll resign after he takes the oath in 2025 and turns over to VP. I don't know. It's just a weird situation. I mean, I think there's just not that much excitement because we just have old candidates, the flash in the pan. There's certainly a deep bench of guys and girls in their 40s and 50s. That would make sense. I mean, on paper, it's Gavin Newsom's time. What's also interesting, this is like totally deep in the weeds, but Hillary Clinton is speaking to the NAACP, which is the large African American lobby here in the States. That seems odd. Like, why is she speaking to this huge conference? You know, and once you run for president, you never not want to run for president. So there's certainly a lot of angst on the left, no doubt. But there's a desire to beat Trump. And I think, you know, the more people that are in the Republican side, Trump can squeak through. The way the primary system is set up, it's winner take all.
I don't know if it's a unique situation in US politics, but you've got a situation, as far as I can see, where both front runners are wildly unpopular. You know, nobody wants either of Trump or Biden, and it doesn't.
But that might not. I don't know. Does that how? Yeah, getting back to personality. I mean, I don't know. Does it really matter that the president is popular or not? I don't. You know, I mean, I don't even know what Joe Biden's doing today. I mean, I think that's fine. I don't know. Like, we put so much attention on these politicians and the coverage, and you know, I don't. It's just I don't know. Maybe the status quo is okay.
Well, whilst we're talking about elections, and we trailed this 2 weeks ago, I confidently predicted that 2024 would see mayhem. Well, we won't have to wait that long. All we've got to do is wait until the 20th of July, which is what? That's just about 2 weeks away, or a fortnight, as I would say. We've got a coming together of 3 by-elections with 2 in the pipeline, all of whom, and I think I'm correct in saying this, are rock-solid Tory seats. And there's a very strong chance that they will lose maybe 4 out of 5, even 5 of them, which would be staggering. I mean, we'd be talking about losses in the sort of Canadian equivalent Kim Campbell type situation.
Wow, now, Kim Campbell going deep, man.
We're really going to have some insane swing from an 80-seat Tory majority to a, you know, people are talking about 150 to 200 seat Labour majority, and then everybody's like, well, no, that can't possibly happen. But at the moment, the Tory party is just tearing itself to pieces. I mean, there's strong rumours, and they're probably wrong, but you know, it's this time of year for rumours, isn't it? That there's a move to get rid of Rishi Sunak this summer. Now, love him or hate him, that doesn't exactly seem the smartest thing to do. But look at the choices that Tory backbenchers have made over the last 3 or 4. I mean, they've been all over the place. You know, Sunak, we've got a technocrat, the ill-fated Mrs. Truss. Well, she sort of had some grand vision that nobody liked, and she was gone before it happened. And then, of course, we had the exact opposite of Sunak in Boris, the populist. And all 3 of them have failed. And so what do you do if you're a Tory MP other than type up your resume? I don't know.
Well, yeah, my observation about elections is that I always remind candidates or folks that work on campaigns, like, you just won this campaign. Like, the people really don't care about the next election. This idea like the red wall, or this is a Tory seat, or, you know, I mean, democracy is very fluid. It's what have you done for me lately? There's all kinds of other factors into it. It's the ultimate, you know, behavioral economics study.
Sure.
And, you know, they've been in power for 12 years. You know, I mean, at a certain point, even John Major knew that. Like, you just can't stay in power for so long. And then it does get back to the internal, like, oh, if we just have the best PM, that'll lead us to the, you know, number 10.
They look
you just start
very
kicking yourself, don't you?
They turn inwards, the Tories. As I've said here before, my view on the opposition is barely any better. I mean, it's not that we're waiting for some, you know, cometh the hour, cometh the man moment. I mean, we're going to get, well, what is, you know, to my mind, Keir Starmer could be in the Tory party and Rishi Sunak could be in the Labour party. I mean, this is part of the problem. Now, there is a little bit of an underground movement coming, and this could really hurt the Tories, is that the right wing of the Tories, probably the Brexit wing, if you like, are thoroughly fed up with Sunak. And they've cobbled together a party called the Reform Party, which is sort of every idea you think's a good idea when you're down the pub. And they've kind of put it into a manifesto. Well, they used to be 1 or 2%, nobody took a blind bit of notice. Latest poll, they're 9%. Well, 9% gets you nowhere in first past the post, but it's enough to absolutely slice a large chunk of Tory votes and potential seats out. So, as I say, mini mayhem in July, more to come next year.
I don't know what my advice. In some ways, my advice to the Tory party is like kind of get past the pain, rip off the Band-Aid, call the election now, and then start rebuilding. But I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're in those seats, it's easy to give advice when you're not, in there.
There's going to be a lot of bloodletting as and when the Tories lose. I mean, I'm assuming they are, unless there's an absolutely unbelievable handbrake turn coming down the road. But if they do lose, there are kind of two or three things that matter: is by how much, and what do they do then? Because the two wings of that party are incredibly split. And I would have thought Mr. Sunak would be packing his bags as, opposition leader or Tory leader pretty swiftly. But depends on the scale of the loss. I mean, I guess for the observer's point of view, the absolutely fascinating one would be if Labour win with a tiny majority. If they win with like literally 2 or 3 seat majority, and then do we limp on with yet more chaos for 2 or 3 years and then try and resolve everything again? I don't know.
Well, the geopolitics of it and the anti-Biden vibe, out of the press, I don't know. Does the Labour government help improve U.S.-British relations? And I don't know, does the Labour even change of government? Does that change Britain's standing in the world?
I think in general, there's never been a big party political difference in terms of relationships with the United States. The only example I can think back in is the 1960s, when Harold Wilson, Labour PM, flatly refused to commit British troops to Vietnam. And that definitely did cause a little bit of a breach with the Johnson administration. And rather tends to be forgotten, rather unusually, the Australians did send troops to Vietnam, but the British they weren't instructed by the Americans, but they were heavily leaned on, and Wilson said no. But with that exception, and then of course you go back to Suez and all the rest of it, that's all ancient history. I think over the last 50 years, there's been pretty much a bipartisan approach towards the United States, to be honest.
Well, it's certainly interesting. It's just like this cloud hanging over UK politics. And I think here in the States, there's going to be, Biden literally, I think he's going to go on the campaign trail and say, yeah, I'm old. You may not like me, but oh, by the way, the other side is completely batshit crazy. Keep me in office, which, sometimes is like the best campaign strategy.
What slightly surprises me is there isn't a palace coup within the Democrats who say, look, enough is enough. Here's the new chosen woman or man. Let's crack on, and you must retire.
I'll give you a Mark Twain. Yeah, a Mark Twainism. He would always say, I don't want to be a member of an organized party. It's something along the lines like I'm a Democrat. The Democrats, pearl clutch. It's a much more ad hoc kind of coalition than the Republican Party. It's much more diverse. The spread between union membership and progressives, feminism. It's pretty vast, and it's much more of a coalition.
Yes.
So he's like anything else. He's probably seen as like the least worst person for the job. And it'd be really hard. Everybody like Gavin Newsom, getting back to the governor of California, like he's trying to be a good team player. He has said publicly, I'm not running for office, but he's like making himself very available to the media. He's happy to come to your, local Democrat dinner and speak.
So he's on the circuit effectively, isn't he?
He's on the circuit. He's waiting for the call. Yeah, he's ready, but he's like being a good team player. He's probably the most out there than anybody else, which is interesting. But Hillary is a total wild card. If Hillary said she was running for president, or if Joe Biden said he was stepping down, and she would raise $100 million right away. So I don't know.
How old is Hillary? I know it's terribly ageist, but
she's younger than Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, we all are. But
I don't know.
Yeah, but she's popping on. I mean, this is like.
But I don't know. But people are living longer. I mean, I don't know. Does age really? I don't know. And maybe it takes like 60 years or 70 years to be president. I don't know. Do we want a 40-year-old president? I don't know. That seems pretty crazy too.
Why not go wild and have one who's about 60?
All right. Hey, speaking of that spy, is Richard Sorge, or Richard Sorge?
Yes.
Sorge? Richard Sorge. Yes. I actually wrote about this guy in 2018 because I was turned on to the story. It was like, are you listening to Richard Sorge? Like everybody has a Richard Sorge in their life, but you're spot on. Like he was in Tokyo, 41, went to Stalin, said, "Hey, this is what's going to happen."
No, it's one of the big sort of espionage coups of the Second World War, but kind of half forgotten, really, or not well remembered. Put it like that.
And this guy, he was seen as an outcast. He wasn't in the belly of the beast of Moscow. He was in this fringe provincial job, and it's interesting. It's the psychology of it too. Like who's giving the message? Where's the message coming from?
So who's Mr. Putin? Who's Mr. Putin's spies these days, and where are they?
Well, when you circle everybody internally and you've got nobody speaking truth to power, and you have nobody, and everybody's aligned, their allegiance is to you to stay in power. That's not a good system.
It's just, Russia to me seems like, I know we said earlier it's difficult to understand what's going on, but let's make an uneducated stab and say I think it's a bit like medieval Florence. There are various cabals and groups, and they're all kind of fighting against one another, and at any one time there's a top dog and the others get murdered. And I like it or hate it, I think that's kind of where we are.
Well, it would be fine if they didn't have nuclear weapons, right? I mean, if it was medieval Florence, seems okay. Good art,
Yeah,
plays,
you're right. I mean,
good drama, but
it's a terrifying prospect. And also, again, I repeat this, maybe intermediate terror of chemical weapons.
Yeah.
Because I think there's much more likelihood of stress, drifting into chemical weapons, dreadful way to put it, than full nuclear, which of course is what happened in Syria and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Oh,
that was sobering. All right. Speaking of sobering, what are we reading and watching?
Well, 2 weeks ago, or was it 4 weeks ago? I think my memory's going. I think it was 2 weeks ago. We were extolling the importance of India.
Correct.
And I made the comment about, well, Americans will be eating curry soon. And I had a look in my vast bookshelf. It was not that vast. And I realized I have a really excellent Indian cookery book, which I've never, to be honest, I've never really taken much notice of. It was a Christmas present from a couple of years ago. And I think the person who gave it to me probably thinks I'm dutifully cooking away every weekend on all sorts of exotic Indian dishes. Anyhow, to the point, here it is. It is the most phenomenal book. It's called Dashoom, and Dashoom is a small restaurant chain in the UK run by Indians, and it's basically a guide to... It's not going to show up really very well here. First of all, I'm afraid yet again it's another blockbuster.
My God.
I'm always coming up with blockbusters, but it's full of every dish you could imagine. But not just that. I don't know if I can find a page, but it's got all sorts about the history of cuisine, and it's all based on what now we call Mumbai, but there's still an aristocratic strain of Indians who call it Bombay. And in fact, this, whether you like it or not, this book is called From Bombay with Love. And having talked about doing some cooking and this stuff, I think I'm going to have a go at some of the simpler stuff. But it is the most wonderful book. And in terms of, again, we were talking about marketing earlier, this started as an idea which you may have recognized during your time in the UK and maybe true in the US. In the UK, there's a sort of high street, low-end curry house, Indian restaurant, or there's the staggeringly high-end, almost Michelin star, where you weep at the prices and you don't know any of the food because it seems terribly exotic. But there's very little in the middle. And these guys, Dashoom, are trying to fill that gap. They've got about half a dozen restaurants around the UK. I would have thought, with the right backing and the right commercial nous, it could go a lot further. Maybe one down the end of your street one day. But it's just that middle level, and it's not just curry. It's the whole gamut of really interesting Indian food. So just one last plug. There we are, and you can look them up with a website as well as not just a book. Dashu. So there you go.
Delicious.
We kind of done watching. It's the Tour de France. Just 2 or 3 more very quick observations. As I think I said earlier, the coverage these days is now staggering. Computer graphics that can pick out individual riders in the peloton. I think the quality of commentary is far better. And they seem to have hit a rich seam of some insanely strong athletes and talented cyclists, most of whom are young. I mean, the two main, I'm just looking at our notes here, the two main protagonists, one is 24 and the other is 26. Quite staggeringly, there are guys in their mid-30s still going, which it's completely beyond me. But it is worth watching. You did make a good point. It kind of swallows half a day if you want to watch it live. Today's a good day not to watch it. It's a really boring day today. It's one of these flat, I think it's to give everybody a bit of a rest, sort of flat sort of stages. But we've just had 3 stages in the Pyrenees, which are, I've almost had a heart attack from watching it, let alone the guys who are actually doing it. So there we are. Last plug for the Tour de France, but if you can get to see it, do so.
Have I told you this? Outside, it's a magazine here in the States, and it's dedicated to outdoor sporting activities. And I don't know, like a decade ago, they did a comparison between weekend warrior riders versus the Tour de France, and just the equivalence of power and torque and how much more superior, like 2-3x, these guys on the tour are. I mean, they're just, and even if you're like the best bike rider in your local town, these guys are like 3x, 4x. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling how much more talented they are.
I haven't seen the stats, but things like their lung capacity and their recovery rate in muscles and all this stuff is just off the gauges. And you would have thought they must be reaching some sort of performance envelope where they can't get much better. Obviously, of course, there's still the bad cloud hanging over all the drug scandals from 10 and 15 years ago that must have really rocked the brand. Actually, they've actually cancelled all the results for something like, I think it's 6 or 7 tours, because it wasn't just the winners that were on drugs, it was about half a field was. And so they just kind of erased it from the record books. But now it does seem to be very clean, and it is staggeringly professional, I think. One last metric, which I know you always like. The money for the riders is not humongous. We are not in basketball territory here, or baseball, or soccer, as you guys would call it. From what I can glean, most of the riders are on somewhere between, in dollar terms, I mean the really top guys now, somewhere between maybe $3 and $4 million a year. So this is not mega bucks, but it comes back to what we said earlier about branding. And get the branding right, you can add an org to that, can't you?
Yeah, maybe or maybe the Saudis will show up, the $100 million and change all that. Yeah, to get on the Indian theme, I picked up this book, Caste and the Democrat Politics in India. I picked it up, I realize now, for $3 at the University of Virginia bookstore. It's probably worth $3. I mean, listen, I don't know much about this. It's a bit of a slog, to be honest. Very academic, but I don't know. I'm only 100 pages in. And there's another 200 to go. So
we all trot out this phrase that India's the biggest democracy in the world, and you came up with this staggering statistic last time of 2,500 political parties or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, most of us know very little about the Indian political scene, and so it's probably not a bad thing to dive.
No, I should power through it. I mean, the gist of the book is essentially the Indian Constitution bans castes, but castes are so wired into the social cultural system that it's a bit of a challenge, and just because it's banned in the Constitution doesn't mean it exists. So yeah, and India, I don't know how old. It's not that old, right? I mean, it's not even 100 years old. The new India. So yeah, I'll sell it to you for $2 when I'm done with it.
Well, there you go.
I'll make it $1, a 30% profit. And then the other book I'm reading is Wherever You Go, You Are There, Mindfulness Meditation for Every Day. It's getting
wherever
very
you
relaxed
go,
this week.
you are right.
You're there. So it's very mindfulness, all this kind of fun stuff. But it's got a lot of good Henry David Thoreau, who I'm a big fan of, and Buddhist meditation. So I don't know. I'm spending a lot of time in Asia.
So are you picking up lots of positive vibes from this book? Are you going to be on a different higher plane now?
Well, if I could be Henry David Thoreau and go into the woods and live by a pond, but I don't know. Some of this stuff is, but it's good. I don't know. This week is very quiet in DC, so it's a good opportunity to kind of refresh, get ready for the second half of the year. Good focus. So I'm reading about the caste system and trying to be more mindful.
So it's good. It's good summer reading time now, then.
Yeah. The caste book is a little heavy. I don't know. I was looking for something. I don't know. Somebody who's complaining about personality. It needs a little personality.
With all my books on Indian cooking, but I suppose I'm going to have to go off and do one and prove I've done it at some stage. But
maybe you can do a taste next time we record. All right, buddy. Good seeing you again. Hi to our friends in Italy.
Yeah, they're fading fast now. They're fading fast.
Maybe India. Maybe Indian television is where we need to go.
Yeah. India's got a lot going for it, I feel.
All right, buddy. Good to see you, man. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.